Just like I said with the Mexico City episode, I do think that it would be better for you to watch this video. I'll be including some videos of our time in Oaxaca, and I think it will just allow you to see what we were seeing and experience what we were experiencing. But obviously, if you listen to this episode, you're still going to get all the same information, just for aesthetics. It might be nicer to watch. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Amelie Moran podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about Oaxaca, Mexico, which is the next place that we went to after Mexico City. What you can expect from this episode is talking about what there is to do in Oaxaca, probably a lot of bad pronunciation of places or things that we did there, talking about the best food and obviously how safe Oaxaca is. If you're going to Mexico and you've started in Mexico City, Oaxaca is probably the best next place. It allows you to start to kind of submerge yourself into Mexican culture, and it feels a lot less touristy as a place and just a little bit less mainstream. So let's get into it. The bus ride from Mexico City to Oaxaca is about 6 hours, which in actual fact is not really that long if you think about some of the bus rides that are coming up in this series that I will be talking about. But 6 hour bus ride, and I just remember a lot of it being through the mountains, really, really beautiful. Oaxaca is also the first place where we stayed in a hostel, which was quite interesting because I think we had this preconception that maybe we wouldn't stay in that many hostels, only because as a couple it's actually a lot easier for us to rent a small apartment for the week or stay in maybe like a nicer Airbnb or something. And hostel private rooms are typically a bit more expensive than just getting an apartment for the week or however long you're going for. We didn't actually think we'd be staying in hostels, but this was a really interesting introduction into the whole hostel life and the backpacker life and what they're really like. Another thing I have to say off the bat is if you're going to Oaxaca, stay a lot longer than we did. For some reason, I think it was the beginning of our travels, we were feeling maybe a bit insecure, or I definitely was. And so when we were in Mexico City, we'd actually booked our bus to Oaxaca, booked our hostel for 2 nights, and then booked our next bus. Whereas actually the routine we ended up in was just making sure we had our bus to a destination and somewhere to stay. And whilst we were at that next destination, we would then book our buses and hostels and blah, blah, blah. So I would actually say give yourself 4 or 5 days here because there's so much to do and so many amazing things to see. And Sam and I have both agreed that maybe we rushed Oaxaca a little bit because I think we just weren't sure of our routine yet and we hadn't got into the swing of booking buses and how we do it and how easy it was all going to be. But I will tell you everything in this episode. Oaxaca has so much history in the town, but also just outside of the town. It's got such deep roots in indigenous culture and colonial architecture, lots of art, which we loved learning about because I think for us, this was the start of learning about all of the different eras that happened in Latin America. It's not something we've typically been taught at school. And so this was all new information to us and we absolutely loved learning about it all. The first place we went to was Monte Alban, which is a historical site. We booked a tour. It cost about £25 and then you had to pay an entrance fee when you got to the park, but it wasn't that expensive. The tour takes you around. Obviously you've got a tour guide, they explain all the history to you and teach you about all of the different aspects of Monte Alban itself. It's on this mountaintop which is flat, which is absolutely insane when you think about it because essentially what they did was cut the top of the mountain off and created Monte Alban, the historical site. It's got loads of plazas, loads of temples and so many stone carvings, which when you see them in person, you think, how did they do that? It's just, it blows your mind. And obviously the view, because you're on a mountaintop, is so, so, so stunning. We went on a hot day, which, I don't know, I wouldn't say I recommend it. I wouldn't say I don't recommend it. It was just extremely hot and it feels like you're in the desert almost because there is no shelter. There's nothing to protect you from the sun. So if you are going on a hot day, just wear sun cream or just cover up, just do it. I know it seems ridiculous, but your tour is, I think, about 2 hours long. And if you're standing in direct sunlight, on top of a mountain, you're probably going to get burnt. But what was really interesting was finding out how so much Latin American history is linked. And for example, Monte Alban is linked to pre-Columbian history, which I think it makes more sense to you as you go down the continents and as you learn more about more historical sites. But like I've said, this is kind of an introduction to that and the start of the journey to learning about all of these different cultures and eras that were around. So if that is something that you're interested in, this is definitely one of the best sites to start at. Also in Oaxaca, you have Hierve el Agua. I'm really trying with the pronunciation, which is a natural spring and waterfall. We didn't get to do this because, like I said, we didn't stay in Oaxaca for very long. But if we had stayed longer, that definitely would have been something we did because we'd met some other backpackers that did it and said it was so beautiful, showed us photos, and yeah, we were quite jealous. And then there are also mezcal distillery tours, which you can do, which I'll explain a bit more when talking about food and drink. But I guess you could kind of compare it to a wine tour or maybe like a gin tasting kind of vibe, which I think would have been really, really fun. Now, I have so much to say about Oaxaca and their food because it was all amazing. Oaxaca is famous for their 7 moles sauce, which I had to remind myself of what it was made up of, but it's chili, chocolate, and spices, which sounds strange. You wouldn't put chili and chocolate together, maybe. I mean, it's not something I'd had before, but it was so, so, so good. You'll have it with chicken, rice, any kind of meat. It was so, so good. Another thing we noticed as well, and for some reason we noticed it predominantly in Oaxaca, was people selling grasshoppers in little cups or little tubs, I guess, and you would pour chili powder on it and it would be a very cheap snack. But we've never seen that before, and that is not something that I can say is very common in the UK. And so we noticed it became quite a common theme going through Central and South America, but this was the first place where we really noticed it and it really stood out to us. So that's something to look forward to if you want to try that. And then Oaxaca is obviously famous for its mezcal, which is a distilled spirit from agave. I kind of would compare it to gin, maybe. It's not like gin, but the way it burns reminded me of gin. You get it in this shot glass that, if I remember correctly, was about 2 shots, the equivalent, and they bring it to you with your meal, or you can order it just as your drink, and you are supposed to sip it. Do not shot it. We learnt this the hard way. You are supposed to, it feels very demure. It feels very like dainty, very what is the word? Very classy, the way you're supposed to drink this. And I feel like you're really supposed to savor the taste, really take in what you're drinking. Do not shot it because it burns like fuck. It's got an extremely high level of alcohol in it. I'm not gonna give you a number because I don't wanna exaggerate, but it burns your throat. So that's just a fun fact, a little tip. If you're ever having mezcal, don't shot it. Now, my favorite restaurant that we went to was called Roy's Tacos. We went there both nights, I think, that we were in Oaxaca because they made the best tacos and burritos. And it was very similar to the style of Mexico City that I spoke about in the Mexico City video, where everybody sits communally and you have all the dips on the table, all the kind of dressings and added bits that you might have on your burrito or tacos, have it all on the table. It was very, very cheap and it was honestly amazing. The kitchen was sort of on show as well, which I loved. Again, like Mexico City and like the places I spoke about before, where you see them making everything from scratch. You've got these high stacks of tortillas for the tacos and burritos. You can see them cutting up all the meat, cooking all the meat, dicing all the avocados. I mean, it was just such a lovely, homely experience, and it felt like a really nice home-cooked meal. I did some research and I didn't realise that there were coffee plantations as well in Oaxaca. We didn't go because, like I've said, I just found out. But their coffee in Oaxaca was amazing, which now makes so much sense. And I don't understand how I didn't think of this before, but I think you can go and do coffee tours as well of the plantations, We went and did that in Colombia, so we did that much later on, but I would definitely recommend going and doing a coffee tour there because the coffee in Oaxaca was just amazing. Now, my hidden gem isn't necessarily a hidden gem. It's actually in the main square and it's kind of the main attraction of the main square, but it was the Metropolitan Cathedral. It was so beautiful, and I guess we sort of just stumbled upon it. We didn't plan to go and see it because it's in the main square or just next to the main square. But Sam and I actually went in there and we were looking at obviously all of the art and all of the stained glass, and we ended up getting blessed with some holy water, which was quite a cool experience. And then we did try and stay for a service, but obviously it's all in Spanish and we don't speak fluent Spanish, so that kind of ended quite quickly for us. But it was a really nice experience and such a beautiful cathedral. Is Oaxaca safe? I would say generally Oaxaca was pretty safe. I don't remember feeling unsafe really at any point, even at night. The only thing that I would say is quite strange or foreign to me and is not something that we experience very often is we would sometimes go out in the morning for a coffee and a croissant or whatever, just some breakfast, and we would go and sit in the main square, just kind of people watching, planning our day, and you would see these massive tanks, multiple of them, coming through the tiny town. And I mean, the town looks like cobbled streets. It's not necessarily really built up. And you have these multiple tanks coming through with multiple police or army, and they're holding these massive guns, they're staring you down, and it feels very invasive in a way. It feels very strange, but it's only strange to me because I'm not used to that. So if that's normal, then obviously it's normal, but it's not something we were used to, so we were quite shocked by it and quite overwhelmed. Wasn't sure if that meant that something bad was going on and they were attending to it, or is this just a normal 9 a.m. procedure? Wasn't really sure, but that was the only thing that I wouldn't say made me feel unsafe, but it felt a bit, put me on edge. But overall, I would say that it's pretty safe, especially if you're a solo backpacker. We met quite a few solo backpackers that had been in Oaxaca for weeks and they absolutely loved it. They felt very safe. We met female, male backpackers and there was no complaints of anything bad going on or anything feeling too dodgy for them to go and enjoy. Now I'm going to do my ranking system. I introduced this in the Mexico City video and thought I'd obviously carry on the tradition. So food and drink, I've said 9 out of 10. Like I said, tacos, burritos, amazing. Nightlife, 7 out of 10. Only because we didn't experience too much nightlife because, like I've said, weren't there for very long. History and culture, 10 out of 10. Best way to start your history and culture journey through Latin America. Absolutely loved it. It was so interesting learning about everything and just seeing it all in the flesh. Accessibility and English level, I've said 9 out of 10. Oaxaca is a very accessible town. You can walk around it very easily. If you want to go and do the tours and things like that, usually they'll come pick you up or you meet in the main square and then they'll drive you wherever. So I wouldn't say that that necessarily counts within accessibility. I think if you were going to go and do those things by yourself, there are buses and there are obviously modes of transport. You can get a taxi. So it's still very accessible to you. Also English level, everybody pretty much spoke English. We also met quite a few Americans actually. So it was really nice being able to speak to them, see what their experiences have been like. And a lot of Americans were actually explaining to us that Oaxaca is quite a popular destination for Americans. I can't really remember why. I think it's because it's not as mainstream as Mexico City, but then I'm not sure if that makes it more mainstream because more people are going there. I don't know, but you can decide that for yourself. But I think it's not Mexico City and it's just a bit outside and it's seen to be less mainstream. Safety, 8 out of 10. Felt pretty safe throughout. And then expenses, 7 out of 10. Same as Mexico City. I think just because it's Mexico, it's a bit more expensive than maybe other areas and other countries that we've been to. We absolutely loved Oaxaca, and like I said, we wish that we'd stayed there longer. I think 4 days would have been absolutely perfect. You would have had time to go and see the town properly and also go and do all of the excursions that you want to do. Because of the time restriction we'd given ourselves, it meant that we could only do one thing. Granted, Monte Alban, if you're only there for 2 days, go and do Monte Alban, but it would have been nice to be able to enjoy some other things as well. But I do hope that this episode has been helpful if you're thinking about going to Mexico and you're not really sure where to branch off after Mexico City. I did say before that Mexico City is a really, really good starting point because obviously it's the capital and you can get buses and planes wherever you want. I think people do arrive in Mexico City and think, where am I supposed to go next? Because you want to go to the less mainstream places, you want to experience authentic Mexican culture. And I do think that Oaxaca is a really, really good starting place. I would say it's half and half, slightly touristy, but allows you to start immersing yourself into Mexican culture and it feels a lot more authentic. But thank you for watching and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast either here or on Spotify, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.